Welcome back to this special series of episodes on the Docs with Disabilities podcast, dedicated to shedding light on the extraordinary careers of disability resource professionals, or DRPs. In this unique DRP series, we explore the multifaceted role of these individuals: part psychologist, educator, attorney, architect, clinical specialist, ombudsman, secretaries of state, and all-around MacGyvers. Originating from diverse backgrounds and experiences, these warriors of access collaborate with faculty, administrators, students, instructional designers, and diversity specialists to create inclusivity in health professions education. Join me as I embark on a journey to gain insights into the dynamic profession of DRPs, where no 2 days are alike and thinking outside the box is a necessary skill. In this limited series, I'll delve into the hearts and minds of those shaping the landscape of disability access. In today's podcast, we take a deep dive into the concept of leadership, particularly within the realm of disability resource professionals in medical education. We had the pleasure of hosting a panel of emerging leaders who are shaping the future of disability resources and health sciences. The conversation begins with personal introductions and moves into a rich discussion about the essence of leadership. Our guests shared their thoughts on what leadership means to them, highlighting the importance of vision, trust, collaboration, and empowerment. Thank you so much for joining me today. As I look at all of you, I have such a calmness and joy knowing that you all represent the next generation of leaders. You are in the prime of your careers, and importantly, you're taking the lead as a new wave of DRPs enter the field and seek to become specialized in medicine. I'm so grateful for all of you, and I can't wait to learn from you today and share your insights with our audience. Why don't you begin by introducing yourselves? Matt?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Sullivan. I work at Washington University in St. Louis with our School of Medicine. I've been in my current role for about 2 years now, but I've been in the field of disability resources for about 13 years. A majority of that experience has been working with health sciences and medicine. I also currently am a co-curricular developer for the DRP Academy, which is a Docs with Disabilities initiative. My pronouns are he, him, and I am happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt. We're excited to learn from you. Kara?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kara James. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently the Disability Access Resource Specialist at the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine and Science. I work with our School of Medicine, Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences, School of Health Sciences, and School of Continuous Professional Development. I've been in my current role for approximately 4 years, but have been in disability services higher education for just over 20 years. I'm excited to share that I'm an alum of last year's DRP Academy and am currently co-chair of AIM Access in Medicine.
Awesome. We're so lucky to have you. Em?
Hello, my name is Emily Langham. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Student Disability Services at Eastern Virginia Medical School. I serve our School of Medicine as well as our School of Health Professions. I am privileged to say that I was a facilitator for the Disability Resource Professional Academy and am a member of Access in Medicine. I have been in the field of disability services for around 6 years and am very much enjoying my time in the health sciences.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Em. Ellen?
Good morning. I'm Ellen Kaplan, and I am the Assistant Director of SDS for the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. I began at Hopkins 6 years ago as the first learning specialist and then assumed the role of DRP soon after that. I am currently enrolled in the second class of the DRP Academy, and I'm fortunate to be a member of the Access in Medicine group within Docs with Disabilities Initiative. And I contribute to the programs including the book club, the NBME training guide, and associated webinars, and have provided trainings to fellowship programs to support struggling learners. I identify as a person with a reading disability, and my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ellen. And last but not least, Bill.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Edson. I use he, him pronouns. I am currently the Assistant Dean for Academic Advising at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth College. I've been in that role for about 7 years. So I'm responsible for all the academic advising for the MD program as well as the MPH program, and I serve the colleges for all the disability resource needs that it has. Prior to this, I was executive director for the Academy of Distinguished Educators at New York University College of Dentistry, where I was responsible really for faculty development. I am currently working on the Pathways study where we're looking at outcomes for students in the health sciences with disabilities.
Leadership can be defined in various ways, and its interpretation may vary across different contexts. Therefore, to begin our conversation, I asked our guests, taking into account their roles as DRPs, to share their personal definitions of leadership.
Some ideas come to mind immediately. For me, leadership has a lot to do with having some goals, having vision, or being able to come up with a vision and express that vision, and then thinking about ways to sort of carry out that vision and those values and those goals, which really involves building trust, collaboration, teamwork, working, with people to not only get everyone on the same page and having a shared vision, but also empowering those at different levels to take part in the creation and fostering of the goals of an organization.
So I come from the education background. So for me, it's very much about guidance with feedback. So we talk about the teaching model, I do, we do, you do. I am a big believer in that. I also think that guidance is important when you give somebody the opportunity to judge themselves. So you let them use all the knowledge that they have to then grow and say, oh, I did this well, but I could do this better. And then really have this nice discussion about where could I move with this? And can you please give me your expertise so I can continue to grow? I think the thing about guidance is it's not about the person giving the advice, it's about how the person who's getting the advice receives it and uses it.
Ellen, I think that's really interesting that you said guidance because one of the things that I have thought about was being a trustworthy guide and really supporting the people that you work with, but knowing that, or them knowing rather, that you are dependable and that they can go to you for that guidance and for mentorship as a leader in the field.
So leadership is one of those words that I think everyone thinks they know what it is, and then when you're prompted to answer what is it, it's really difficult to wrap your mind around it because it's so complex. And what I came down to in my own definition was that leadership is thoughtful and intentional action. I don't think that it is designated that any one individual is a leader. I think in humanity, we are all leaders in our own right, whether that be in our career, in our professional fields, or even within our personal lives, whether that being our roles as a friend, a mentor, a family member, a parent, a sibling. We all have the capacity to incorporate that thoughtful and intentional action into our daily lives and be that representation for someone else. And at that same time, I want to note that while it's thoughtful and intentional action, a lack of action is also an action. So always keeping that in the forefront of our minds that what we do and what we do not do can resonate with someone in a positive or potentially a negative light.
Matt, I loved what you said about being that thoughtful and intentional action. That resonates with me. When I think of leadership, I think of being able to influence and guide others. It might be a team, it might be colleagues, and really empowering others, empowering staff, empowering our colleagues, even empowering our students. That's what I think of.
When I was thinking about the question and I was thinking about my view of leadership, it's always been very narrow in that leadership is the ability to set a common goal and inspire others to move towards that shared goal, to the betterment of something or the completion of a task. But listening to you today, I feel like, oh, I should expand my thoughts about this because it's so much more than that. Matt, I'm going to start with you. You've been co-leading the DRP Academy, a 2-year pilot program that is building this curriculum for DRPs specializing in medical education. And this is a huge accomplishment, but you have shown such leadership in that role. And I feel like when I first met you, I saw so much leadership potential in you. So I'm really curious about what you think are the qualities necessary for effective leadership in disability resources.
Yeah, there are very critical skills or components that I do think are necessary in a regular daily aspect of our work. When I've had conversations with other colleagues throughout the nation, I ask them, what got you into disability resources, or why did you come into this field? I think at the core of it, in its simplicity, people will state, well, I just wanted to help students. And then I think most of us, if potentially not all of us, once we're in the field, we realize, oh, wow, this isn't just about helping students. This goes so much deeper. Yes, one of our prongs is to assist students in navigating throughout their educational journey, but it's also broader because we're not just advocates for students. We are more importantly and primarily advocates for access. So when it comes to being advocates for access, the qualities that I pin down and always focus on myself that I consider being a consistent learning and development process are critical thinking and communication. On a regular basis, we must be thoroughly reviewing and analyzing what we're doing to making sure we're staying on top of the work and humbling ourselves when potentially for 3, 4, 5 years we've been operating in one certain aspect or capacity, and then all of a sudden we go to a conference or we hear a leader in the field speak and we think that completely just rocks my foundation. How am I going to backtrack on my core philosophies that I've been working through over the last 5 years and start to educate my faculty and my students on a new philosophy? How will that look? How do I do it and still keep trust in my stakeholders to saying our field is changing? And that too means that I'm constantly learning and knowing that, yes, I've been in the field for over a decade, but I forwardly think and realize, oh, 10 years from now, this field will also be drastically different, meaning my practices will also be drastically different. And then that other piece to the critical thought process being the communication. How are we intentionally bringing our stakeholders in and speaking with them, corresponding with them, letting them know that we are here, and educating them in a way that they are empowered to do their work?
And Matt, your communication skills are amazing. I think when you're running an office, which of course usually corresponds to being in a leadership position, that communication is the single most important factor in accomplishing your goals as a leader and to developing your team and having a team that understands what the expectations are, how they're meeting expectations, and feels fulfilled. We talk about the big turnover in DRPs. And one of the things I think that is so critical to success and removing this attrition that we're seeing, keeping people in roles, is really developing that person. And that takes time and attention and very clear communication with that person. So I think you've hit on some really amazing things. I'm going to move over to Emily. Emily, you share something with Matt that I've noticed throughout the years, and that is the way that you communicate. You both have such a lovely way of communicating, both in times of prosperity and success, and really importantly, in times of conflict and stress, where there's an issue to be resolved. And you're so thoughtful and positive and respectful to all parties in those situations. So I appreciate you just in general. What qualities do you think are the most important for a good leader?
Thank you for all of that. I think interesting that you see similarities between Matt and I, because I see a lot of similarities in my thoughts to this answer to what Matt has shared with us. I think that flexibility and open-mindedness that you have to have, particularly in the health sciences, is so critical. Our field, the expectations, the technology, the way that we can implement accommodations is constantly changing, constantly evolving. And I think that having that flexibility and open mindedness while still maintaining that trust is of the utmost critical nature to the field. And understanding that you don't have all of the answers, and that is okay. And knowing that you are also surrounding yourself with people that can pick up some of the slack that you might be missing, or can help to inform different parts of your work, which will only help you grow as a leader. And so I think that, just to highlight again, the flexibility and the open-mindedness, I think, are for me, the two of the most important qualities, particularly in the health sciences, because of how varied programs are, but how varied and quickly the technology and advances are coming into our field.
I just wanted to jump in here because just kind of building on both Emily and Matthew's ideas, because what I'm hearing, and it's something that really resonates to me, is the importance of a certain amount of humility and flexibility that you have to have in this field as it evolves. And I think that that's critical to sort of be self-reflective, to understand your role as a professional involves constantly growing, learning, and keeping up to speed. I would also add that there's a certain amount of projection of confidence as well that you have to have as a leader. I went to a double AMC leadership development thing. They had the image of a swan. I don't know if any of you have the swan metaphor, where they're like, you need to be like a swan. You're this gracefully gliding across the pond. It's so beautiful, and but underneath you're paddling. You're paddling really hard to keep everything going. And I do think that there's a certain amount of confidence and projection of this confidence, and that comes from having experience, making sure that you are professionally developed and current, so that you can talk confidently about these things, and also be able to say, look, this is an area where we need to do a little more research, or where we need to do a little more investigation. I'll get back to you. That, of course, builds trust in what you're doing. Really think that those are important concepts, and it's lovely to hear my colleagues talking about that, because I know it resonates with me very, very much.
We're talking about communication, trust, flexibility, and you're adding some really key components. I think with every leader across any practice for disability resources, you need that communication, trust, flexibility. One of the things that you're adding, Bill, that I think is so unique to medicine is that confidence and projection, in medicine especially, because sometimes we're fighting some hierarchical structures that are deeply embedded in ableism. So to be able to have that confidence is extraordinarily important. Things move so quickly and the stakes are so high that your team, which may not be other DRPs, in fact, I think most of you operate independently, right? So your team that may include learning specialists, deans of students, faculty need to be able to rely on you to have that right answer, to trust that you are going to lead them down a path that is not going to result in litigation or harm to the student or an alteration of fundamental requirements for their program. So I love that you added that and appreciate it. The piece on self-reflection and humility, I think that's something, of course, as humans, we should always carry with us. When I think about good leaders, and all of you are excellent leaders, which is why you were asked to be on this particular episode. I think leaders are developed, right? They're mentored, they emerge over time versus overnight. You build these skills over time, you move up slowly in your roles, and you have the opportunity to fail, which I think is critically important, and to get feedback from people who care about you, mentors, sponsors, supervisors. Ellen and Bill, how did you begin to develop as leaders?
So, funnily enough, my leadership style and my introduction to how to be a leader didn't even start in education. It started when I was in college. I was working at a retail store, and what was ingrained in me was, as you like, if you have a manager, the manager's job is to train somebody up so that person can take their position and then they can then rise to the next position. So for me, it's always been about whoever I'm working with. It's really important that I am literally giving them all of the knowledge I can possibly give to them, because I want somebody to grow and eventually either take my position or go higher depending on what their aspirations are. So that was my first introduction to really what a mentor was. But along the way in my various stages of my career, I've always had somebody who has done something in that way to really help shine the light on me, help me figure out what my strengths are, what my gifts are, and how I can then use those gifts to go back out and work with and inform other people. And they might be things that I'd never thought about when I started this. And then all of a sudden, I'm going in a completely different direction because somebody has encouraged me. But when it comes to my work as a disability resource professional, when I started at Hopkins, there was no person in my role. There was no centralized DRP or SDS. And when the university hired Kathy Axe as the executive director to kind of centralize that, she knew what my background was in special education and advocacy, and she really leaned into that and said, "Bring what you know to this job, and then let's work together to develop this position and really make a great, solid office throughout the university and share your wisdom." And she encourages everybody to share their wisdom and their areas of strength.
I think good leaders inspire people to reach for the next level and at the same time make space for them to be there, right? They're constantly sharing that space with the person through sponsorship. And it sounds like that's part of what Kathy did. I know that Kathy's also really supported you in getting involved in doing national webinars, providing guidance through AIM. She is not only creating space for you at Hopkins, but also supporting you nationally. It takes a leader that has humility, that's not driven by ego of that role or of that title, to create that space and make sure that people are getting opportunities.
Similar to Ellen, my first exposure to sort of mentorship and leadership and what that might mean happened in college as well. I went to a small, formerly liberal arts college in Florida called New College of Florida. It was a very unique, very special place. You had these contracts with the faculty members. You basically said, okay, I'm going to take these courses and these are the expectations, and they would sign off on your contract. And if you satisfied all the requirements of your contract, you got a satisfactory, like a pass, like, so you had set your contract and that sort of thing. And so every student was assigned a faculty person that was hopefully in your area of concentration as you got towards the end. But initially, when you got there, you just got a random person. Well, I randomly was assigned a professor of religion, Mike Michelson, who also happened to be the president of the college. I was really young and nervous. And what I noticed was so great was that he was very generous with his time. And when I began to realize initially was that, he would occasionally we would have meetings, or he would meet with some other official, and he was, okay, Bill, I want you to come along. And I realized that, leaders we're just people. He was a person like everybody else. It allowed me to kind of engage. So I can relate to this person. I can share things about myself as a person, as a human being, with this person who I'm like, oh, as the president, And so that opened a door. The reality that like anyone can be this sort of thing. And so along my career, I've sort of gravitated, I think, towards folks in leadership roles, primarily because I realized that I can ask you to be a mentor. When you're interested in them, they're interested in you, and people are interested in hearing what you have to share, and certainly in these leadership roles. And so what I've done throughout my career is sort of basically build relationships with people and try to learn from them, ask them questions. When I was at NYU, my mentor was dean of the college. The dean of the college was at the College of Dentistry. I would ask him questions like, how did you get to be where you are? His answer was, I just always say yes. People ask me to do things and I just say yes, for better or for worse. I'm like, okay. As I think about one of my mentors, Lisa Meeks, I've definitely applied that strategy. I've been fortunate to kind of have a relationship with these folks throughout my career. It's still, even at NYU or even at Dartmouth, the same thing. And I'll just wrap up by saying some of the qualities, as I reflect, that they all kind of share, I think they were all really marvelous communicators, right? Just seeing how well these people can just express, it's something that I aspire to today. It's something that I want to bring. They're all very generous with their time. These are busy people who would make time to develop you and think, maybe they saw something in you. They had some trust in me. It was okay to fail. It was okay to kind of be like, all right, this is part of your growth. Try it out, see what you can do, and then we'll debrief. I think that's been my approach as I reflect back on the leaders that have inspired me.
Everything you said was really important, but one thing you said I would describe as powerful, and that was the I can. I approached them because I felt like I can. And it's such a powerful statement. And I think I want to dig into it just a little bit. You talked about people being authentic, right? That authenticity was part of what invited you to that space, and people flattening the hierarchy. These are really important qualities in leadership. And I want to make the point that I think they're really important qualities in leadership for disability resource professionals, especially because we all come from very different backgrounds. And so when you think about a general hierarchy, let's use medicine as the example, the student is on the lowest of the scale, and you move up to student, resident, trainee, et cetera, fellow, attending physician, assistant professor, associate professor, like dean, assistant dean, associate dean. Every level has a very clear demarcation of authority and power. And in disability resources, because we don't have those titles and people do come from all of these different degree programs, there's this melting pot almost of people and experiences and backgrounds that doesn't naturally translate to any sort of hierarchy. So, and I think there's an equal opportunity for people to lead, to gain those skills, regardless of their background. And so I love everything you've said. And I wonder what everybody else is thinking about these three things that we've very clearly added from Bill's contribution: authenticity, flattened hierarchy, and accessibility.
I'd like to say that I definitely I love that and so appreciate you putting the words to that during this conversation. I have been so lucky in the leaders that I have served under, and from starting work with, her name is Emily Ton, and knowing that I could go to her at any time, and she might not be able to chat with me at that exact moment because there was a lot of other stuff going on. But knowing that as soon as she got a free moment, that she would connect back with me and we'd be able to have a meeting, whether it be over the phone, in person, on Zoom, whatever it might be, and that time was always given. And that has been such a consistent theme throughout my journey within disability resource. And I have experienced that with Dr. Meeks. I have experienced that with my current supervisor, Dr. Allison Knight. And I know that's something that not everyone gets to experience. So I feel very lucky. And that is something that I definitely try not to take for granted, as hard as that is, since I've just kind of had it. And I know not everyone's had that experience.
So, Emily, just to add to what you're saying, because I think that is so, it's so important, to recognize that, yes, I have something that I need to say. My mentor's not available, but they're not forgetting about me, and they value our relationship. There definitely been times in my life where there hadn't been a mentor. I was put in a position where I was my own island and there wasn't anybody there. And so sometimes you have to be your own advocate and do a Google search or read a book and email that the author and cross your fingers and maybe they'll get back to you, or put your own money towards going to some kind of personal, or professional development and then network there. And that's kind of how I found Dr. Meeks in this whole group, and which like changed my life to begin with. But even when I was doing executive function training in my own practice before, I would like randomly email people who I'd met there and say, "Hey, I was at this conference and I heard you speak and I have a question. Could you answer it?" And almost every time they were so lovely and gracious to get back to me and answer my question. So sometimes we have to kind of go outside of our own circle into other areas and really forge those connections because we don't have them, all the time.
I love what you're saying, Ellen, about not being afraid to reach out and to be vulnerable. I'm pretty introverted. Some of my mentors recognized this in me early on in my career and pushed me and encouraged me to take risks. In addition, they pushed me and inspired me to keep advancing in my leadership roles. Like you, Ellen, I found this group by taking a risk and reaching out to Dr. Meeks. My life has also been changed for the better.
We've just completely destroyed the perception that you have to know somebody to get connected, right? So many of the people that I now work with are people who have emailed me or came up to me at a conference and just said, "Hey, I'm really interested in this." And I think that's true for really all leaders. There's something beautiful in being vulnerable, but I want to take it and move it into our qualities of good leaders. But the leaders who have been willing to be vulnerable with me, and that vulnerability leads to kind of authenticity, flattened hierarchy, trust, all of these other things. In those moments, that's when I felt like I could reciprocate and be vulnerable. And that's where you grow. It's the hard stuff. When you're constantly having to carry the cognitive energy of figuring out how to interact with somebody or wearing a mask of perfection at all times in fear of letting somebody down, that's exhausting. So I really think that vulnerability is another key characteristic to leadership. Kara, I want to move over to you and ask you some specific questions. First, you've just taken a leadership position with the larger organization of Docs with Disabilities under AIM, and we are so honored and so glad to have you. So clearly, you had some identified leadership skills that we noticed in you and that were being observed by others. I'm wondering, in the disability world or in your roles in other avenues, what are the most impressive leaders or perhaps impressive leadership skills that you've seen? What was the situation and why did that make such a big impression on you?
Well, thanks for those kind words, Lisa. I have been blessed to work under a few really impressive leaders. Not only were those individual leaders, they were also mentors to me. The qualities that they all had in common were many of the same qualities that we've been talking about today. They were all excellent communicators, confident, humble, relational. They cared not only for us personally, but professionally. They were very generous with their time and they all have very high integrity. One of these leaders is Dr. Michelle Hamilton. She was a professor and chair of the graduate program that I was in, and she has a way of bringing out the best in people. She sets high expectations for people, and they always rise to those expectations. Michelle is consistently authentic. She makes time for people. Michelle encouraged me to take my first professional leadership role as manager of evaluation services at the Stout Vocational Rehabilitation Institute. She saw qualities in me that I hadn't yet discovered. As I think of impressive leaders, I also need to mention 4 powerful leaders that I have admired and looked up to for a long time. Several years ago, when I was starting out as a director of a disability service office, I was selected to participate in Project Shift, a 3-year Department of Education grant. There were many wonderful outcomes of that experience. I would say, though, one of the best outcomes was getting to know and to be mentored by Sue Krieger, Melanie Thornton, Gladys Lowen, and Carol Funkus. Through their mentoring, they encouraged me and gave me space to spread my wings and the opportunity to fail in a very supportive and nurturing way.
You named some really amazing people there, people that I have a very high regard for, a lot of respect for, and people who have also taught me, if not directly, obviously all of those people weren't also my mentors, but indirectly in the way they carried themselves and the way that they interacted with others. So one of the ways that we learn how to become a leader is through this modeling concept, right? We watch others that are leaders and we think, ooh, I want to carry myself that way. Becoming a leader isn't solely dependent on witnessing exemplary leadership. Rather, it can also stem from navigating situations where leadership is deficient or poorly executed.
I don't know if you've ever had like a bad boss or like someone who wasn't a good leader, I've in some ways, some of my leadership development has come about by just like being like, I don't want to do what that person did. You know what I mean? I think there have been some studies of like leaderless groups and how people organize. And oftentimes it can be the person who's the loudest in the room or like overconfident. And that person with no leadership skills who will end up, driving the ship. And then like you have these toxic things that can happen, and so I'm curious to know what people have done, when they've been in situations where there have been basically poor leaders. How have you grown or worked with? I'm curious. Has anyone had that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in my, across my careers as a public school teacher and then in private practice and in higher education and even in life as a parent and things like that, I see what doesn't feel good to me and I try to go the opposite direction. So, but always keeping in mind, like, when like the child is screaming in the grocery store and everybody's looking at that parent, like, get your child under control. We haven't walked a mile in that person's shoes. So we have to take some of that into consideration and someone might be short with us when we are just asking a question, like Matt was saying earlier. And part of it is we just don't know what they woke up to that morning. And so let's give them a little bit of grace. But at the same time, let's take note in how what they said landed on the person receiving it.
Ellen, I think you brought some really astute points up. There's been a lingering thought since Bill mentioned his experience with leadership development and how there's the comparison to being a graceful swan. I think we all need to realize that even the most graceful of swans were once ugly ducklings. So, from that perspective, the difference with leadership is it's not linear. It changes, it's in flux, and sometimes we can go from being a beautiful, graceful swan to having days when we are the ugliest of ducklings. But we have to be authentic with that. We have to be willing and, as Kara mentioned, vulnerable enough to saying, like, this is who I am. Because when I look at leaders who some might view as whether it be unpolished or potentially off the cuff, those have actually been the leaders that I have felt most connected to in some ways, in a manner that I feel as if they are human and that I can gain something from their approach. Because if they were able to escalate themselves to the positions of power that they're in by being who they are authentically and unapologetically, it means that it can go back to a definition of leadership that everyone has the potential to grow into the space that they land in. It's not something that's predetermined or predestined. We all have it within us, but we must remain authentic to ourselves in order to help propel ourselves forward.
Let's dive into that. So leaders make mistakes. They make mistakes, and how they handle those mistakes, I think for me, is a pivot point of whether I want to work with and under and beside this leader, because we all make mistakes. It's how you handle that. The ethics are so important to me, and how you carry yourself ethically is so important. What have you learned from the mistakes that the leaders above you have made?
I have worked under a couple of challenging leaders. And even though those times were challenging, I still learned from them. The lessons that I learned were that I didn't want to be that type of a leader. I've also had the privilege to observe some leaders make mistakes. And what I respect about those leaders is their willingness to own their mistake and apologize to those who have been impacted. I respect that in a leader because we all make mistakes. That is how some of us learn and grow. And as I work with others, I really do like to share the mistakes that I've made, and I like to turn those into learning opportunities. Oftentimes, at the end of the day, we end up chuckling about the many mistakes that we've made.
And Kara, it makes you human, right? It takes away that, if there's any of like of a power differential, or if anybody is, like afraid, oh my gosh, I was so afraid to speak with you. It makes you a human being. We all make mistakes, and it's okay, and we can move past them and we can learn from them.
Bill, hey friend, congratulations on your recent promotion. I'm so excited for you. You've achieved so much. And I've just really enjoyed working together over the last several years. I've been blessed to be able to collaborate with you in leadership and research capacities, and I've watched you navigate the complexities of life, leadership, and love over the last 3 years, which truly has been an invaluable lesson for me. As you reflect on the journey of acquiring leadership skills, you mentioned the AAMC training, but I'm curious to know if there were other specific training programs, experiences, maybe even books that played a pivotal role in your development. How do you seek and absorb leadership knowledge beyond the guidance of your mentors?
Thank you, Lisa, for your kind words, and it's been an honor and a pleasure to work and grow with you. There are professional development activities that I've been involved in that have been, very formative. One of the main ones I mentioned before, AAMC has a series of development, growing professionals who work in medical schools who want to advance in their careers. Very kind of career focused and very med ed kind of focused. But a lot of what I think done is, in terms of professional organizations, is trying to join the groups that are within the professional organization. So picking different groups. I was formerly part of the race and disability community of practice for AHEAD, and being part of those sort of groups where you can network, have some say in how the priorities are set for these different groups and subgroups, but also the larger organization. Getting involved in different sorts of advocacy and support groups that work within the field that you're interested in, I think, is a really great way to get those kinds of experiences. Recently, I should say, kind of thinking, and it's kind of building on what folks are talking about before, but also thinking about my journey, especially in the last handful of years, and not being so hard on myself. There was a book that someone recommended to me, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown, and it's really about practicing self-compassion and kind of talking about how you can embrace your imperfections and others, and kind of accepting your talents less as gifts for ourselves and more as a gift that you give to others. And so it's really talking about how knowing who you are, loving who you are, and how you can engage with people. And sort of, it's interesting to think of that book as a leadership text, right? But it really it's allowed me to be a little easier on myself and more understanding and graceful towards others, which I do think has been very, very helpful. So I was very fortunate to have that book recommended to me by one of my trusted colleagues. So yeah, I think that's some of the ways that I've engaged, kind of outside of, some of the more traditional sources.
So Good to Great is a book that I will always recommend, because the translation from one core piece in that book, and I believe it's called the Hedgehog Principle. And the Hedgehog Principle is finding the core of what you do and do it as well as you possibly can. I don't think that message gets across to our field as much as it should. And that's why I will always circle back to the component that we are advocates for access. At least that's how I view it. And that is the core of what I do. And I have found for myself, when I've tried to add more things onto that, it starts to chip away at how good I am as being an advocate for access. And at that point, I figure out, okay, I need to get out of the weeds. I need to get rid of some of these other pieces that are just adding noise. I need to get back to the focus of being an advocate for access. The other book that I would recommend is Leaders Eat Last. I believe it's by Simon Sinek, which is a more holistically formed book on leadership that has always kind of sat with me. I mean, even that principle of a leader eating last, it goes back to a military example in the book, but it's always kind of helped me understand that it's not just the principle that you're sacrificing or you're being a martyr and other people are going before you, but it's helped me understand that sometimes the strongest leader is the one who says the least. And it takes everything in. So it's not just about saying, okay, well, I'll go last. It's about the observation process we're taking as leaders. It's the fact that even though we may not be an active participant or engagement in that process, we're still on the outskirts of it, looking into saying, I need to absorb now more than I need to contribute.
I'm a huge Adam Grant person, and the books that have moved me so much the last few years have included Think Again, which I think is really important. I actually think the book Think Again is more important as you've moved up. Emily, for our audience, Emily just showed the book, but I think as you move up, that book becomes critically important, because the more focused or specialized you become, the more narrow your mind works and the more quickly you come to conclusions when perhaps you shouldn't. Most recently, I bought the book Hidden Potential, and I bought it for my entire family this year. Big book person. We'll put all of these books in the show notes. I was curious, how do these emerging leaders view their own achievements? What holds the most significance for them?
think my biggest accomplishment professionally was, I think being asked to be a part of the DRP Academy. I think to me that was like that showed me that I had an inkling that I knew what I was doing.
I was also going to say DRP Academy and being asked to be a facilitator, as well as getting my first director role. That really is such a catalyst in my confidence as a leader.
I would say my first real big, or and it's an ongoing big one, was my being asked to develop a faculty development program at my prior institution, kind of completely on my own, and the trust that was put in me there really was phenomenal and gave me a lot of skills, and also was able to help me promote and grow in my career. So I really look back to that as a really formative moment.
I know that this may seem like such a very small and minuscule answer, but I say it because I look back on all my accomplishments, and the one that consistently to this day moves me the most is something from one of my first experiences when I got into the field. I oversaw a testing facility, and a student came in. It was about the third week of the semester, and I I said her name and I said, "Hello, how are you doing? How's everything going with classes?" I knew a little bit about her personal life, and she stopped me right mid-sentence and she goes, "I need to just tell you I've been testing here for 3 years, and you were the first staff member who's ever known my name." And to this day, I'm constantly moved by that, and knowing that as a leader is not always about my big accomplishments, because I get really bogged down and in my head about those, if I'm being completely honest. I always go back to what are the smallest things that I've done that still to this day rock me to my core. And that's one of them, and just knowing and reminding myself that it's the small things that can create big impacts.
Thank you, Matt, for that reminder that oftentimes our accomplishments don't have to be those mountaintop experiences. I would say that one of my greatest accomplishments was being a part of Project Shift. That experience empowered me to move our campus away from the medical model of disability, and we really did embrace that social model of disability. That was a big shift for our campus. Most recently, I would say that my greatest accomplishment has been being asked to co-chair AIM, Access in Medicine.
How might these up and coming leaders advise those in the audience aspiring to take on leadership roles in health professions, education, disability services?
My advice to DRPs that want to become leaders is that it's okay to set boundaries. It's also okay to make mistakes. In addition, there's a community of people here to support you. Feel free to reach out. We are all in this together.
I would say remain courageously naive. The more you know, the more scared you will become. So don't let that hold you back, and the fear of all the what ifs bog you down. Remain naive. Don't approach the work as if you already know the outcomes. Approach it as if everyone else is keeping an open mind. So keep the courage. Keep some of that naive nature, because people will be forgiving and they will be accepting along the way.
I would say that, this question might vary a little bit where you are in your career, but, I think certainly don't forget the place of sort of joy, humor in the process, and, and trying to enjoy yourself, and have others around you that you're working with, and enjoy the process as much as possible. I think there's a place for loyalty and thinking about that, and really, taking care of those who take care of you. And then I would say maybe for us, it may be a little further along. Certainly, for leaders that have inspired me, it's spreading the praise around, spreading the good vibes around, and passing credit on to others who maybe could benefit from it as they develop their careers and that sort of thing. And I think that's also would be something that I would think for, especially for those old leaders who are more advanced in their career.
I would say reflect on where you ultimately would like to be and then think backwards and think of some of those concrete steps that you can take to get there. And then, like we've mentioned throughout our talk today, of reach out to the people that are already doing those things and find out from them sometimes how they've gotten there, but finding some little steps to get to that bigger goal so it doesn't seem so overwhelming.
So I would say don't take the no. Take the no and figure out how you can turn it into a yes.
It has been such a joy. You are all such a joy. You fill my bucket. I love engaging with you. I'm so grateful for the work that you do towards our shared goal of access in medical education and health professions education broadly. I am indebted to you for your leadership within not only our organization, but in your institution and in other organizations in which you engage. I just adore all of you. And I have learned things today. I think together we've created quite a list of characteristics for people looking to lead. And I would end it by saying, lean in, right? Lean into the uncomfortableness, lean into the uncertainty, lean into the possibility of making errors. What you've heard today is that, we learn by essentially deciding that we're going to move forward and taking some risks, reaching out to others, making ourselves vulnerable. And always, 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 I can't stress this enough, stay humble. Throughout this episode, we explored the various pathways to leadership and the role of mentorship in developing leadership skills. Our guests shared stories of how they were influenced by both positive and negative leadership experiences and how these shaped their own leadership styles. As the host, I was struck by the collective wisdom of our panel and the shared commitment to advancing the field of disability resources. It was clear that each guest brought not only expertise, but also a deep passion for their work and a dedication to fostering inclusive environments in medical education. In closing, this episode highlighted the evolving nature of leadership and the diverse qualities that contribute to effective leadership in disability resources. Our guests' insights provided valuable lessons for current and future DRPs, and their dedication to the field promises a bright future for disability resources in medicine. So thank you to all of our guests for this thought-provoking discussion, and to our listeners for joining us on this journey into the heart of leadership within disability resources. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue to explore the dynamic world of disability resource professionals focused on training the next group of DRP specialists via the Docs with Disabilities Access in Medicine DRP Academy. This podcast is a production of the Docs with Disabilities Initiative and is supported in part by the University of Michigan Medical School Department of Family Medicine M-Disability Program, the Stanford Alliance for Disability Inclusion and Equity, and the Ford Foundation. The opinions on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, their respective institutions, or the funders. This podcast is released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative License. This episode was produced by me, Lisa Meeks, with the help of Jacob Feeman.